So our topic today, John, is something that I know is really important to you. Tribute to the troops. How do you remember this all coming together originally? What's the origin story of Tribute to the Troops?
The origin was 9/11. Obviously, it started all of the mechanism that caused the dominoes cascade to happen, with the wars and the invasions and things like that. But we were in Houston when 9/11 happened. It's one of those events, you talk to older people, about where they were for Pearl Harbor or for the assassination of JFK. They can tell you exactly where they were. Most people can do the same thing with 9/11. They can tell you exactly where they were, how it unfolded, how they realized it was a terror event, how you realized America was under attack. And it was the same, obviously, for us. We were in Houston, and we see this that morning, the buildings are being attacked. America's being attacked on 9/11. And of course, the show got canceled. The world got canceled at that point. The world changed that day. And being in Houston, most of the guys couldn't go home. I could, because I was living in Athens, Texas, about 3 or 4 hours north. So I drove home that day. Later that day, we found out the show was canceled. We had nothing to do but be around the hotel, and I kind of wanted to be home. And you could so many more things available to you, and because we didn't know when the world would open back up. 9/13, I believe it was Thursday. I believe it was. We had the first mass gathering in the United States. And so I got word from it when I was at home. So I drove back down to Houston. Vince had a meeting with us and told us that no one had to appear at the show. It was your own free will if you wanted to. But we were going to send a message that they weren't going to stop us. And talking about the terrorists. And, we couldn't do anything else. And this is kind of what Vince had in the message. We can't go fight them with a gun. We can't go defend, what had happened, because it's already happened. We have a chance to put on a show and get people's thoughts off of what happened and show that America is going to continue. And that literally was the thought behind that show. And we didn't know if anybody would show up, Conrad. We had no idea what was going to happen. Security has not seamless like it is now. And so when you had people to be in search for bombs, and you didn't know if there was more terror attacks coming. Remember in 9/11, we didn't know what was going to happen next. We didn't know if it was a first wave of several waves. We had never had this happen in our life where we were actually under attack, our country, and not just under attack, but they attacked 2 buildings. There were kids in daycare in the building. There was no rules anymore, and we didn't know what would happen. So when we had this show come together, we're sitting there and we don't know if anybody's going to show up or not. People had tickets, but we didn't know if anybody would come. And that day when we walked out there, man, it was just one of the most emotional moments of my life to see 20,000 people or whatever that building held, all holding American flags. It was just remarkable.
It is weird to think about because it was such a unifying time in America. And that almost sounds crazy, but the few days after that, America just had a whole vibe, did it not? Like it felt like it was a big community. I know that, the most recent election cycle, and we don't talk about politics here on the show, but that really focuses on how divided at times America can be. But man, on 9/12, the day after 9/11, there was no semblance of that, right?
There wasn't. I remember Arsenio Hall, or one of the comedians, was talking about George Bush's potential re-election chances, and they said, just show up. He had a 94% approval rating or something after 9/11, because you're right. Everybody in the country was behind America. We threw away the partisanship away, and everybody wanted to just be American at the time, which was a pretty cool feeling. It came off a terrible event, but a pretty cool feeling. We went out there for that show, and Conrad, the video doesn't do it justice. Lillian Garcia out there singing, and she always did a fantastic job. But that day, man, it was like, Whitney Houston back in '93 or when it was, when she sang the God Bless America or Star Spangled Banner or whatever it was. People just played it over and over. That day with Lillian was like that. That was something that, if I live to be 1,000,000 years old, I'll remember that till the day I die. That was really cool.
It was a really cool day. I'm glad that we got to talk about it. I know that it's a real soft spot in Bruce's WWE career as well. So I liked hearing it from your perspective, but it's actually a couple years after 9/11 that the whole idea comes together for this Tribute to the Troops show in 2003. Between 9/11 and the first 03 Tribute to the Troops, how many trips did you make to the wartime troops?
I believe 2. So we started, the first trip was the next year. Now, right after 9/11, this kind of sets up this whole story. WWE was the first group to go down to ground zero. So right after 9/11 and then 9/13, when the show was, I was watching this stuff on the news, and I thought, man, I just want to go help. I'm too old to enroll in the military, but I want to do something. So I called the office, WWE office in Stanford, and I said, hey, can I go down to Ground Zero? And all I want to do is help. Vince and WWE, like everybody else in New York, was helping any way they could. Vince was with the restaurant and the merchandise. So the guys, because guys were just staying there. I mean, when we saw them, it was unbelievable what we saw. They're talking about the first responders. And so Vince got word that I wanted to go to Ground Zero. And when he did, he said, if you're going, the whole company's going with you. And so we planned the whole company trip off of that. And we went down there, and I believe it was the Philadelphia 76ers. I'm not sure. It was the NBA team was going to go with us. We were the first group to go down there, and they had some anthrax scare or something, and of course wrestlers have never been scared of white powder. So it wasn't like we were going to cancel. And so, we all went, and I think it was the Philadelphia 76ers. They canceled. I can't remember who it was. It was an NBA team. And we went down there, and it was just remarkable to see these firefighters, these EMTs, these first responders. They hadn't slept in days. We're watching them going in and out of the buildings, what's left of them, the rubble. They're still burning, still trying to find bodies. It was absolutely incredible experience to be down there. And then you fast forward this to the next year when they started taking the first civilian tour to Afghanistan. And I believe it was the next Christmas. The Sergeant Major Army, 12th Sergeant Major of the Army, Jack Tilley, was putting a group together to go. And Vince called me. And maybe because of the 9/11, maybe because of Ground Zero, I'm not sure. Vince knew I had a passion for this, and asked me if I would go on a trip to Afghanistan. Then I went the next Christmas to Afghanistan. We're the group I was with, I think, was the first civilian group to go into Afghanistan.
So when you're putting together this USO show, I mean, here's what's written about it in the Observer back in 2003. In a show that really came together about 3 weeks ago, WWE took 15 performers and 19 technicians to Baghdad, Iraq over the weekend for a 3-day, 2-night trip, which culminated in the company's first ever television taping in a war zone. The heavily pushed Christmas edition of SmackDown was originally the brainchild of John Bradshaw Layfield, who'd gone on numerous USO-sponsored tours of military bases in both Afghanistan and the Middle East since the U.S. became involved in military actions. Layfield presented the idea to the Armed Forces Entertainment Group, which approved the event. The rules were that WWE could only bring 33 people on the tour. McMahon himself picked the talent that would be going, not all of whom were thrilled about the idea of going because of safety concerns. McMahon admitted they were mostly concerned and a few were apprehensive. McMahon said he felt relief when it was over, both because it was a physically exhausting trip and also because he felt, as the owner of the company, that the safety of everyone was part of his responsibility. On the way back, he told the wrestlers that they should always remember the experience and consider it as the zenith of their careers. The techs, who all were asked to attend, and numerous military volunteers helped with the setup of the show and building of the ramp. So this sounds like an all hands on deck. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to see how the sausage is made behind the scenes with WWE, and it takes a lot more than 33 people to pull it together. So you guys pull it together here with a crew here, and I know that the first year was maybe a bigger sell because nobody really knew what to expect. Are you a part of the recruitment efforts to get talent involved, or how does that come to be as best you recall?
No, not overtly. I mean, people knew I was going over there. I think I had a torn bicep at the time, so I was doing some stuff for Vince around the world, just promotions. I went around one of the Xbox. I think that was during the time frame, so I was not involved a lot with the day-to-day wrestling. I say involved as far as being a talent. I think that was during the time. But now, obviously, when I came back, everybody wanted to know about the trip. The next summer, I went there the first Christmas with the 12th Sergeant Major of the Army, Jack Tilley, Daryl Worley, Mark Wills, the country singers, wonderful actress Carrie Turner was there. Crystal Reams, who was part of the Voices of Freedom. I'm going to get her band name wrong. She's going to hate me for this. Who was part of the military, beautiful voice. She sang, I believe, the national anthem one time in Washington, D.C. when we were there. And so the next summer, I'd gone back to Iraq. This is one of my trips. I've been on a few trips, in between time, going over to Iraq. And that was kind of I don't know if it's my role, but it was something I enjoyed. And I was there with Ron Simmons. It was hotter than balls. It was like 130 something degrees. They say it's a dry heat. So is a welding torch. It was shocking how hot it was. We landed in southern Iraq, like at 2:00 in the morning, because we flew military over. We didn't fly commercial over. We did fly commercial back one time. And I'll tell you a funny story. We were, they called it Rehabistan, because you couldn't drink there. So we had been over there for a couple of weeks, couldn't have a drink. We finally are going to fly us commercial back for some reason out of Kuwait, and we get on the plane, and Ron says, "Could I get a beer, please?" Flight attendant says, "Sir, I'm sorry, we don't have any beer." He goes, "I'll take a champagne." Like typical, flying off, champagne service. She said, "Sir, we don't have champagne." He goes, "Okay, I'll take wine." She said, "Sir, we're a Muslim airline. We don't have pork or alcohol." And Ron said, "I don't give a damn about the pig." The alcohol. So we had been over there in Rehabistan for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then we had to fly back. We're expecting this big party to go back, have a few drinks, and we couldn't drink. So it was the flight back was the worst part. So, but we had been over there in southern Iraq, and man, I'm telling you, we landed, it was 102 degrees like at 2:00 in the morning. It was so hot. A lot of those guys didn't have air conditioning in their tents or anything. They were in 100+ degree heat 24 hours a day. It was unbelievable to see all this. And we hooked up with, I think we had, I believe, Terry Runnels and Ivory were with us. I believe that's right. And they did a wonderful job. Whoever's with us did a great job, by the way. I believe it was those two. And I was there, and I heard that the Sergeant Major of the Army was in the country. Well, the 12th Sergeant Major of the Army, he was the 12th at the time. For those that don't know, Sergeant Major of the Army is the highest NCO in the Army. I mean, he's like considered a 2-star general, but when you talk to the troops, he's considered like God. I mean, that's the guy who came up from either being drafted or a private who comes up to the highest rank that you can make as a non-commissioned officer. I mean, he's a soldier. So when I heard he was there, he was at my wedding, actually. He's a good friend of mine. I said, "Can I talk to him?" And they said, they just laughed at me. They said, "Sir, you can't talk to the Sergeant Major of the Army." And I said, no, he's a friend. I was in Afghanistan with him. I said, "Please let him know that I'd like to talk to him." And they told me again, said, "Sir, you can't talk to the Sergeant Major of the Army." And I said, "Okay, just tell him I'm on the phone and let him make the choice." And so they said, "Okay, we'll do that." So they were shocked when he's a good dude. He's just a dude. He came up as a private. He's the most important non-commissioned officer in the Army, but he came up the tough way. He's a regular dude. And in fact, I used to watch him around bases. He could do as many one-handed push-ups as he wanted. He would challenge every person. He'd nearly always lose by one. If he was like 55, he'd do 54. He's a cool dude. And so when I talked to him, I said, "SMA, how you doing?" And he said, "John," he goes, "Are you guys over here wrestling?" And I said, "No, sir." I said, "Just over here with my tag team partner, Ron Simmons, and the Washington, at the time, the commanders, cheerleaders were there." And I said, "We just kind of hooked up and meshed the unit for a USO tour." And he goes, "Oh, that'd be great if you were." And that was the whole inspiration for Tribute to the Troops. So I started thinking about it. I had nothing else to do. We didn't have a radio or, iTunes or anything to listen to. So we're on this bus, and it's so freaking hot. We're just sweating. Remember, Ron was right underneath one of the little vents and just like had his head up like this, like an animal trying to get to the water. It's like that. It's the only thing that's keeping him alive. And so I started putting the idea together of the old Bob Hope USO tour. And if you remember, I mean, Bob Hope did some incredible stuff in war zones. Robin Williams did incredible stuff in war zones. And I started putting the idea together of doing something like this with WWE. So the next base I got to, I emailed Vince and I said, "Hey, would you like to do something like a Bob Hope USO tour, but do it in the modern day and do it with WWE?" And he said, he sent me a note back right away. He said, "John, that's fantastic." He said, "I love it. Write it up for me and let's do it." And so that was the whole impetus for doing the Tribute to the Troops. Then I wrote up what I thought we should do. I wrote up the fact that we could go out over and have the soldiers have us stay with them. We wouldn't be going to the green zones. We wouldn't be going to, a lot of performers would stay in Kuwait and just fly in for their performance. Still, they're going to a war zone. Nothing against those guys, but they wouldn't stay in theater. I wanted to stay with the troops out, the FOBs, the forward operating bases, and then do a big show at the end. So I wrote all that up for Vince and Kevin. And then by the time I got back, they had almost the whole thing put together.
Oh, wow. How about that? So we're getting the real deal origin story here. I love that it was actually suggested by a member of our military. That's pretty cool to hear.
That's right. Yeah, the SMA. I've told him, because we were nominated for an Emmy with the Tribute to the Troops, and when I told him that, he goes, "Do I get an Emmy?" I said, "I don't think so." You might. You're the SMA. You can have whatever the hell you want.